Welcome to ESGX Live, the community for information and education to inspire collaboration and action to create a more resilient and more inclusive economy, something which seems almost more important every single week, with me, Nigel Lake, in New York, and my co-host Paul Herman in San Francisco. A very good morning to you joining us from the Asia Pacific region. Good afternoon to people in the Americas with us, and of course, good evening, and thank you for staying up late to everyone in Africa and Europe. We're talking this week about the Impact Investing Handbook. And impact investing is something which has grown dramatically over recent times, part of a longer story perhaps, which we'll hear about today. And of course, many big firms like BlackRock and others have become much more focused on the impact they can have with the capital that they deploy. But this is also something which can be about individuals and smaller organizations. And it's also something which can be about or illustrates the importance of working together. So just as an introduction, I was going to tell just a little story about someone, in fact, who used to work in the Pottinger team, a lady called Annabelle Chauncey and a partner, Dave Everett. And they had worked in Africa in the mid-2000s and reached the conclusion that education was the thing that could really affect change. And so whilst she was still studying a law degree, she decided what she really wanted to do was to create a school. So over the space of a few years, they bought some land in Uganda. They managed to raise about $500,000 Aussie dollars, and they built the school. And one of the really important things they did was focused very carefully on what did they need to do to work with the local community, so that they created a whole ecosystem around the school to support its development. They had some pressure from donors who wanted to see more schools built, because that was an easy thing to do, but they really put their early effort into making sure what they ended up with was in itself sustainable. Now, here we are now, nearly a decade since the school first opened. They have 3 schools now, 1,000 kids, 100 full-time jobs. It's an amazing story. It actually makes me quite emotional telling it. So a great example of collaboration and the impact that people can have. So with that as the introduction, I will hand over to Paul Herman, who can perhaps give us a little bit of an introduction to what's coming up. Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Nigel. Welcome everybody to ESGX. Great to have you back. Really excited that this episode is focused on impact investing. So how to do good and pursue the opportunity to make money at the same time, and to do so across all asset classes, whether that be in equities or bonds, in real estate, in alternative investing, even in how you allocate your cash. So today's lead moderator and expert himself is Steve Gadecki. Steve and I have known each other for more than a decade. And what I admire about Steve and several of the panelists on this call, on our episode, Steve's a multi-sector person, a Renaissance person. So he grew up with some Wall Street expertise. He advises endowments and foundations, as well as nonprofits. He teaches at NYU impact investing and impact-related courses. And of course, he's an author. So that's like a 4-sector person. So a big bingo card for Steve. And Steve has written books and how-to guides about impact investing. So part of what we'll talk about today is the Impact Investing Handbook, which is a free online guide just released this year. And so we're really excited to dig in deeper, and with a panel of Stacey and Myrna and Mike and Tom, dig in how we can do that as investors, as advisors, as asset owners and asset allocators, as well as how to influence other people to follow. So, so Steve, come on board, and delighted to have you with us today. So please give us an introduction to the Impact Investing Handbook and how investors can make a more positive impact in the world at the same time as pursuing a profit potential.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Nigel, for sharing that very inspiring story from Uganda, because it kind of brings home, when we can talk about frameworks and abstract ideas, how important the impact happens on the ground. So I've got a couple of slides here. I wanted to, as I pick up, wanted to talk about the handbook. If we could maybe pull those up. Yeah, so just moving, moving to the next one, what we're really looking at is the creating value through collaboration. And as all of you know, and I think there are a lot of people who've been in this field / industry for a while, there have been a lot of resources out there. So with this impact, why did we actually want to do a new impact investing handbook? And this, one of the key points is we really felt that there's been so much more interest in impact investing, but there's not been as much rigor. And we also wanted to tie the good intentions of creating impact to specific theories of change. So those were the key pieces. And we also realized that for a lot of people, executing and doing impact investing would mean they're going to be working with other partners and advisors. So this is really the guide here. It builds on some of the work that we did about 10 years ago with Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. And it also builds on, as Paul mentioned, I've been teaching a course in impact investing at NYU, an MBA course for the last 10 years as well. So a lot of the frameworks were developed through my teaching with the MBAs. And I'm really excited. I got to be co-author of this with Patrick Brio, who's the head of impact investing at Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. And it was a 2-year process. I won't go into the details. It's a 2-year process. We've included about 21 case studies. We had an expert advisory board of 18 folks from philanthropy, from industry, helping us along the way. So we're really excited about that. And I think in the chat, we posted the link. This is a free resource. We encourage you to download it. There's the link where you can do that, and hope everyone will have a chance to look at it. So on to the next slide. We wanted to be talking about the framework. And here, this we'll be focusing on for this guide, and this is how we've structured this is how we've structured the chapters. And so for the first, we really are looking at the what and the who to kind of get ready to take action. And then we focus a lot on the why, that's your theory of change, the how to construct a portfolio, and ultimately how you're measuring success through the so what. So that kind of piece. And then ultimately, because there's been a lot of resources out there, the now what, helping folks get organized and actually take action and implement. What we're going to be looking at today with the panel is really this part of who are you engaging with, who are the important stakeholders. And part of when we looked at how to collaborate and to do that, we'll go on to the next slide, please. And so really looking at the what, and there have been lots of different definitions of impact investing. And what we've seen here is that our thesis is that in this integrated world, you just can't look at the positive side of your investments, but you have to incorporate and be accountable for some of the negative pieces. We're also looking at this importance of systems change. So systems change, we feel, is really an idea that's kind of coming out of the ivory towers of academia and policy, and really how to build those into construction of portfolios. And we also want to get asset owners to really reimagine their role in the world and how they can be responsible stewards of their assets. And so we're really looking at how an asset owner can actually be an engaged owner, or are also shifting systems. And in our definitions, we really feel that to be part of impact investing, there has to be a clear intention, you have to be wanting to measure, and then also a definition. Part that some is this kind of contribution, which is the proverbial but for and additionality test. And these three we also see impact investing as weaving together the different sectors of investment, public policy, and philanthropy, and creating solutions that cut across these sectors. So moving on to the part that we will be focused on mostly in our panel today, the next slide is the who. And another aspect of this is that, it can be somewhat confusing to understand where you sit in this system of creating impact using investments. And we want the asset owners that are enabled the asset owners are the stewards of their assets, but they're going to be working through intermediaries, and the two sort of primary buckets of intermediaries are going to be the advisors. So sort of introducing, we have an asset owner on the panel, Stacey Faella from the Woodcock Foundation. We also then have on the panel two advisors. We have Myrna Rivera from Consultiva, a registered investment advisor. We'll go into some more details. And then we also have Michael Lear from the Capital Group. They're both working as advisors. And then we have Tom Siminovic from Trillium, which is the asset manager. And what we want to look at is how do these different people across the impact value chain, how do they work together? What role do they see themselves playing? How are they relying on the other people? And how can they kind of interact? So without further ado, I would like to bring on the panelists. Maybe I'll just have them kind of enter the room they're going to be talking a little bit about their individual organizations and their role. So maybe what I'll do now is kind of see Stacey, if you want to join and maybe share a little bit about the work that you've been doing at the Woodcock Foundation.
Great. First, I just want to say thanks to you, Steve, and to Nigel and Paul for having me here. I'm really glad to be part of this panel, excited to hear the perspectives of everyone here today. I'm Stacey Faella, the Executive Director of the Woodcock Foundation, which is a progressive family foundation based in New York, technically, but our programs span the country and actually the globe. And in terms of our impact investing activity and our relationship to advisors and managers, Woodcock started making mission-aligned investments in the early 2000s and followed with a tool specifically available to foundations called program-related investments, which are really designed to be impact first. Those followed a few years later. And I would say it's really been in the past 5 years that we've evolved our impact investing and really developed a strategy and greater intention around our goals for the impact investing that we're engaged in. And I think for a lot of foundations, which are mission-driven organizations, there's been a recognition that you're really leaving a lot of opportunity for impact on the table if you use 5% of your assets for grant making and then advance your mission, through that activity. And meanwhile, you're leaving 95% of investing activity unrelated to your mission. And at times it can even be counterproductive when you think about the fact, as you mentioned, Steve, all investments have impact and it can either be positive or negative on a given issue. So to give one example of what I mean by that, if a foundation has a conservation program and you're giving away $1 million a year in grants to conservation causes, and then meanwhile you have $10 million in assets that are invested in companies that are actually known to be causing environmental problems, you're essentially working against your own mission. And so at Woodcock, we've been on a journey. We're first working to align all of our assets with our mission. And ultimately, the goal is to take a more integrated and holistic approach to impact that starts with the question of what is the change that we want to see in the world, and then moves to choosing the right tool among grants and the different types of investments available to us to figure out how to get there. And last year we went through an advisor search after recognizing that we'd really be able to go deeper on that if we were working with a firm that specialized in impact investing. It was a really great process to go through, and we did sign on with a new advisory team earlier this year. And this first 6 months has really been about building a relationship. They have a process for getting to know us, getting to know our board members, really understanding our objectives in terms of financial goals and impact goals, and figuring out where we are now, where we want to be, and what the pathway should look like to get there. And they've worked with us to develop an implementation plan a new investment policy statement that incorporates financial and impact objectives. We're continuing to make progress toward impact alignment, and that's really where we are in our journey now. So I'll pause there for now.
Thank you, Stacey, and for sharing that your role in sitting as an asset owner. Maybe I'll hand it over to Mike Lear, who's with the Capital Group, where he works as an advisor. So would love to hear how you're more about your organization and how you're working with the other folks on either side of you in the chain.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me on the call. First of all, I'd like to talk about my journey a little bit. I've been in ESG or impact investing for the better part of 20 years, helping clients along in their journey to make sure their portfolios are aligned with their long-term goals. I work at Capital Group, as you mentioned, where in 1974, we started a private client services group as a small part of our asset management services. And we started it for one main reason, is to serve as a multifamily office. And now we've grown, we've invited in outside investors. And as we've grown, we've seen client demand increase for ESG, which is great for us because we believe it's been a part of our philosophy for decades. We've been incorporating ESG integration into all of our strategies across our 175 analysts all around the world. And now we're refining that. So in many ways, we're implementing a strategic vision that we've had for a while. And so we believe that ESG is a reflection of good management, both strategically and it allows us to gauge their long-term thinking. Because a lot of these issues, you don't want to be surprised by. The biggest risk is that ESG blind spot that you may have and not realize. So we've tried to incorporate that in our analysis. And also we believe that, many times in many sectors, higher margins come along with hand in hand with folks that are paying attention to those ESG factors. And so we found that our returns and we are helped by incorporating those into our analysis. And so in my role, I'm out there meeting with clients all the time. They come in many different flavors, as you can imagine. Some are dyed in the wool, know exactly and precisely where they want to enact change. I've had families come to me and say very specifically, we're singularly concerned with climate change and everything else is just noise. But I've also had the benefit of working with clients who are just new to the space and they just want to do better and feel like their money is aligned with their ethos. And so for those clients, I've been able to, share my knowledge that I've gained over 20 years and reflect that back to them and hopefully reach a portfolio that they can be proud of and they can share with their family and the next generation who are far more concerned than past generations were about these issues. So I'll stop there. I could do a larger sales pitch on the space, but I'll leave some space for the others.
Okay, and we'll be looping back because we really want to open it for the various panelists to be asking each other questions. So Myrna Rivera from Consultiva, please, if you want to join us and would love to hear about your welcome. Let's see. Yep, you got to, you're still on mute, Myrna. There you go. Great.
There we go. Thank you very much, Steve and Nigel and Paul for inviting me. My name is Myrna Rivera. I am the founder and senior advisor of Consultiva Wealth Management. We're based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So we're in sort of the center of the planet and the center of a lot of different things going on. I have been an investment advisor for nearly 40 years. And I became quite acquainted and involved with responsible investing back in the late 90s and involved when we created Consultiva in 99. We made it a point to lead as advisors on the conversation around what does it mean to be a responsible investor? And that took us from ESG concepts in the public markets, which weren't necessarily went by that name at that time, but evolved into the concept of ESG, and also the concept of place-based investing, of investing in seed. Now, many of you, I'm sure, have heard about Puerto Rico and all of the challenges that we've had over the last few years due to natural disasters and our fiscal crisis. And so being in the middle of that for me has been essential in helping our clients to figure out how they can achieve their financial returns and at the same time make an impact in the local communities and helping out local economic development. So that's what I've been doing. Our clients are endowments and foundations. We have several clients in the US outside of the Puerto Rico cluster, but certainly the large part of the work has been in Puerto Rico. And contrary to some of the other colleagues, my job has been pedagogical. It's been about teaching, about helping people imagine being able to make investments and make financial returns and at the same time create jobs in their own communities, particularly our endowments and foundations, our university endowments, our faith-based organizations, and helping them to develop investment policy where there's a voice in there that says that we shall avoid the dissonance between what we believe in and what we work for and where we put our capital. So it's been very rewarding to lead, if you will, to introduce the conversation and to guide that conversation over the last 20 years. And to begin to see, finally, over the last 5 years, an ecosystem, a local ecosystem emerging of fund managers and local monies being directed into local projects. And we can talk a little bit more about that a little later. I must add the statement that my comments today are mine. They don't necessarily represent those of Consultiva's employees, shareholders, or clients.
Great. Thank you, Myrna. And I want to get back to some of your talking about like the educational as well as like the place-based work. So let's bring on Tom Simunovic, who's with Trillium, and look forward to hearing from him.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. And thank you also to Nigel and Paul for inviting me to join this conversation. It's an honor to be among such illustrious speakers. As Steve mentioned, my name is Tom Simunovic. I've been with Trillium Asset Management for about 4.5 years, serving as a ESG strategy specialist and relationship manager. Effectively, my role is to represent Trillium's sustainable investing solutions to our network of intermediary partners, from institutional consultants to financial advisors to banks, and really helping these intermediaries and their clients along this journey to understanding how to potentially align their investments with their mission, their values, and their wealth objectives. For those of you that aren't familiar with Trillium, we are one of the oldest investment management firms in the United States that is exclusively dedicated to this type of socially responsible, sustainable, responsible, and impact investing. It's all we do. It's all we've ever done as a firm for almost 40 years, since we were founded by our founder, Joan Bavaria, back in 1982. And we're proud to work with, as I mentioned, institutional clients, financial advisors, and their retail asset owner clients. Just quickly about Trillium, high level, I think there are two sort of key points that I want to emphasize. One is that, we really focus on the positive integration of ESG criteria throughout our investment process, really to help identify the companies that are best positioned for long-term performance relative to their peers, combining both ESG best practices and fundamental financial analysis to really marry those two concepts and try to prove the business case that the companies at the leading edge of environmental stewardship, corporate social responsibility, and ethical corporate governance are also the ones that we believe are best positioned for long-term performance. The second point that I'll emphasize is Trillium's work as activist shareholders. I think one of the aspects that we'll likely touch on throughout this conversation is the idea of impact investing. So in addition to the way that we integrate ESG principles into our investment process, is also how we leverage our ownership stake as active and responsible stewards of investment capital to press companies for positive change on what we believe to be material ESG concerns, partly as I would say integral to our mission as a firm, but also integral to our fiduciary responsibility to protect and enhance shareholder value and drive broader societal impact. I think I'll take a step back. I'll leave it there, and looking forward to joining into the conversation.
Great. So if I would like, if all the panelists could kind of turn their cameras on and mics. And what I'd like to do is, let's see, and I think, Stacey, I'd love to hear, like, so you as the asset owner, what are you looking for when you're looking for the advisor, or when you're looking at the asset managers? What are some of the things you have found helpful, or you might like that you're not able to have?
Sure. Yeah, I'll comment first on what I think has worked well for us, especially recently in working with our advisors. The first thing, and I'll add, I think some of this isn't necessarily specific for impact investing, but for just a strong relationship between clients and advisors more broadly. Frequent communication has probably been the #1 thing that's been really helpful. I actually have a standing call every other week with our current advisors, and we often have an agenda in mind, but I find that even if we don't, we really do end up having useful conversations. And that regular communication it creates greater clarity, greater transparency on both sides about how we're operating, what we're doing, what our processes look like. And it's also led to more opportunity to discuss and hone our objectives together, and really just made the process more collaborative. And I also think setting expectations is really important. Not all clients like the same level of communication, and different asset owners might want more or less information about different things. So I've really appreciated that our advisors are definitely aware of that. They'll propose a plan to us as far as how they're reporting and what kind of information they're sharing. And they ask for our feedback. They ask a lot of questions early on to understand what kind of information our board really likes to see, what they've gotten in the past, and what they haven't liked about it, and even what presentation style works best. So it's not always even about what the actual investment activity is. That's commentary more on how they're actually sharing with it, and what level of detail they're getting into, and being very individualized and tailored to Woodcock as a client, as far as making sure it's aligned with what our board is hoping to see and expecting. And then as far as what I've seen in the space that I think could work differently, I think on the theme of collaboration, I've heard kind of a criticism from both sides that sometimes clients can be extremely specific about what they're looking for. And I've heard from clients that sometimes from others that they feel not particularly listened to by advisors or managers, that, there can be eye rolling, there can be a sense of, they're not taking me seriously when I say what I'm looking for. And I think what's actually happening is, there's not always immediate investable opportunity on any given impact theme or a particular issue that some clients would really love to dig into on impact investing. But I think there's opportunity for more of a give and take and conversation for discussion of if someone's looking for a particular investment, what is it that they're really trying to see change in the world? What kind of alternatives might exist? How can there be some give and take to understand, to make sure clients are also understanding why certain expectations might be unrealistic, rather than just being told no, or feeling like it's not really getting through to their advisors. So I think the theme of this conversation in particular around more collaboration, more communication, really is key.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I think it's also how people think about these relationships, because in some ways you're you're picking someone who's going to pick specific investments, and then you'll report back on them, and that there's actually a lot more iteration around that. So maybe I'll pull in Mike. What have you been experiencing in kind of hearing from the other sides in terms of the product side, and also like from clients. What are some of the things that have worked or not worked?
The product side has been amazing. If you look at where we were in 2000, where just about everything was SRI and exclusionary, to the vast amount of choices we have and only growing today, it's just been incredible. And I'm happy to be at this time in my life to have seen the growth. To one of Stacey's comments, one of the benefits of having that experience is there's a bunch of advisors out there who aren't at all interested in this space and don't have the long-term thinking to really put the time and effort into the space, which is only benefits folks like myself and Myrna, who are really trying to stay educated, trying to stay on top of things, and just making sure. I keep coming back to this concept of alignment, but it really is that important. And so for clients, similar to what Stacey's talking about, whether it's a family, an endowment, or foundation, they should really come to their advisors with questions about whether their portfolio is aligned with their values. Are they including for-profit prisons in portfolios? Are fossil fuels an issue? And then for those areas at the margin, like natural gas, like you need to be able to have those conversations to really flesh out where clients are going to sit. And also, there's issues come up with utilities. A lot of coal-fired, or a lot of electrical utilities are coal-fired plants still. So that's a challenging issue for clients, and you just want to make sure those are addressed. So the biggest thing I wish more clients would ask is ask that of their advisor. There's enough tools out there at this point in time to be able to meet the needs of, I would say, 90% plus of clients who are interested in the space. But a lot of them aren't asking the questions. A lot of them are very loyal to the people that they work with for a long period of time, and I get that. But if your needs aren't being met, you really need to push the envelope there and ask the right questions and make sure you're getting exactly what you're paying for. So I'll leave it there and maybe leave it to Myrna to follow up.
I just to call out one thing you said, Mike, I think is about this proliferation of product, because I think that's changed so dramatically as we sort of talk about and people who want to do impact with their assets kind of moving from this mindset of scarcity to abundance in terms of what's possible. And that was one of the things that we looked at in the handbook, was really, it's not just about, does there exist an international ESG? The products are going to be created. It's like making sure the products actually do what you're wanting to do, which requires you to think, the asset owners to think about the why and why they're doing it. So that piece it's really been a shift, I think. And some people may think, well, there's not really that many SRI funds, or, but there are.
We've had this evolution where, ESG was kind of a dirty word that meant you were sacrificing some return, to now we're facing these issues of greenwashing, where people are actually pushing the envelope on what they define as impact or ESG. So it's been an interesting transition.
Great. So Myrna, what are you seeing? Got to unmute. Yes, there you go.
Well, I'm in a special place, as I mentioned before. Our clients are faith-based organizations, they're college endowments, they're public funds, and most of my work has been here, so it's quite localized. So helping trustees to understand the power that they have of being agents of change, for some is very exciting, and for some it's not. We get this incredible pushback sometimes, which is it's frightening and it's striking. I think it comes from a tradition of what money is really meant to be. And so when you talk to a foundation and they say, well, we do it with our grants. We support the community with our grants, and so there's a sense of concentrated risk just in where you invest your grant money. And so putting some of your investment capital in that same place for some can be rather scary. And for a long time, there were no real investment options. So it was a philosophy. We started with the public funds, with the public markets, and the whole concept of responsible investing and how that's evolved into ESG. And that part, because of the trend, because there's more, because there's a UN principles of responsible investing, there's an audience now that's at least more willing to listen and to incorporate language around ESG in investment policy. And that's something that, that we do very assertively. Actually, we put it there and we assume that the client, if they don't opt out, it's in there. So, we are an impact investor as a firm. We are signatories of the principles, and we incorporate that language in our documents from the get-go. So from the public side, the implementation is a lot easier today because of the variety of the instruments, the asset management firms that are out there, and very few asset classes are left. I mean, one of the things that was going on earlier, as you would all remember, is that there were asset classes that you didn't have an ESG or an SRI version of them, if you will. And today we do. So that's in the public fund side. My passion has been around in situ. How can we generate the financial returns by investing in our own communities? There's a universe of investable assets here. And this is true whether you're in Buffalo, Appalachia, New York City, it doesn't matter. It's the same story. You have a universe of investable assets. You have a community that works for you if you're a public fund. And New York is a perfect example of that. There's an actual, it's called economically targeted investing, ETI, in New York City, in the controller's office. There's actually an office called ETI, and I learned a lot from New York on how to do this. So, you model and you imitate and you say, we can generate financial returns, and at the same time, we can solve problems for our constituents. We can solve problems for these communities that we say we want to work with, or that we do work with through our mission, through that other 5%. In the case of pension funds, it's making that allocation. So what I've seen, and this also is true for our clients in the US, is that there's an interest and there's still a huge market opportunity for persons like Mike and myself of groups of organizations with trustees that are at least willing to pay attention to the topic and to be guided in a conversation, participate in a conversation and in a learning process. And fortunately, it's no longer solely academic. We can actually say, okay, we agree on this. Okay, let's execute. And these are the things that we can do today with your money. These are the commitments that we can make today. And so that progression of product and visibility, and I think climate change has done a lot to focus on the E of ESG, has made it easier, but there's still a lot of challenges out there, and perhaps later I can tell you about how we've addressed some of those challenges in Puerto Rico.
Great, thank you, Myrna. And yeah, I think, and also just the shift as the world has become, you've been able to focus more deeply into particular places. There are challenges to that compared to working purely in the public markets, but there are ways, there are people that have been doing this and that it's very achievable. So it's really interesting. I want to go over to Tom and see, you've been listening, you've been listening to the asset owners, the advisors. You have a product that or not just, a strategy, a product. Like how do you see your fitting into this? And also, I think it might be interesting, as you said, Trillium's been around from the beginning of a lot of this work. So how is Trillium also kind of thinking about product and different types of products as these conditions change?
Sure, no, thanks, Steve, and appreciate all the comments from the other presenters. I think I would just sort of take a step back, broaden the aperture a little bit, and talk about sort of three high-level observations that I would say we have from our vantage point as an asset manager, looking at the rest of sort of the impact investing chain, if you will, between the asset owners, the intermediaries, and then, of course, us on the asset management side. The first is really, I think, what Mike and Stacey alluded to, which is, setting expectations. I think it's incredibly important to get everybody on the same page with what exactly it is the end client means when they say ESG investing. What does that mean to them? And the reality is that most end clients might not be familiar with the terminology of ESG or SRI. And so how do we demystify that and understand what it is exactly they're looking for so that we can best serve them in the next stages of the conversation? And I think, we haven't done ourselves any favors in this industry with the various overlapping taxonomies and the different definitions and acronyms. It's kind of like linguistic anarchy. And I think that makes it very confusing to many of the financial intermediaries that we work with. And it definitely makes it confusing to many of the end clients. And so I think it's important to demystify that entire conversation and meet the clients where they are, using the language that they understand for how they articulate what's important to them. And then building off of that, I'd say the sort of second most important part is once you've demystified the language, once you've come up with a common language that you can move forward with, your job doesn't necessarily get any easier, because there are no two approaches to ESG investing from asset managers that are the same. And so now you have to understand, you have to do the diligence and do the homework to understand what it is that Trillium does that's different than a Pax or a Calvert, what it is about their approach that's unique, and is this the right fit for the end client? Because there's no sort of one size fits all. And so it's really understanding the client's perspective and then understanding what's available in the marketplace and what would be the best match for that end client. And then thirdly, Steve, to your last question, you're exactly right that Trillium, I think, has benefited from sort of the longer arc of history, is sort of being a part of this evolution from its very genesis back in the 70s and 80s. We've really seen the evolution of this space and very much been a part of it. But I think that evolution is critical to emphasize, is that this isn't stagnant. This is ever evolving. It's always iterative. And a big part of that evolution is driven by the feedback cycle, the loop of communication and information that we get from our advisor partners and from their end clients, so that we can continue to evolve, to stay at the cutting edge of ESG best practices as an asset manager, but also to continue to deliver what it is the clients and the advisors are expecting of our strategies, while also striving to deliver market competitive strategies that achieve those social and environmental impact outcomes that we seek through our advocacy work. And so I think those are sort of the three sort of main observations that I'd say from our perspective. But I'm always curious, and I hate to sort of break the interviewer wall, but I'd love to better understand, perhaps from Stacey and or Myrna and Mike, what it is that you all might be looking for from us as asset manager partners, that we can better equip you to go out into those conversations with your end clients. Or for Stacey, as an end client, how important to you is the relationship that you have with the asset manager, or is everything intermediated through that advisor partner?
Yeah. So why don't I, with that,
There's a lot there.
I'll open it up. No, but I would open it up to Stacey or Mike or Myrna to respond or to ask questions back, to see if we can get, it's always sort of getting this kind of interactive discussion on Zoom, but please jump in if folks, rather than calling to, yeah, go ahead, Stacey.
I'll just, to the latter part of your question, your question was actually part of the conversations we had when we were trying to figure out what kind of advisor really would work for us. And I think part of it comes down to, our own trustees and staff's capacity. We're a pretty small staff foundation, small to mid-sized family foundation. And our board was really, I think there was a lot of interest and aspiration for more direct engagement with managers and products, and even digging in on advocacy and saying, here's what we own, let's go be the advocates. But the capacity, just doesn't match the appetite for it. And so for us, I would say for our portfolio writ large, it's pretty much mediated through our advisors, except for a handful of program related investments that I've managed pretty actively with our board. and I'm in direct touch with those. So where it's really impact first for us, I have direct relationships, but for the rest of it, it's definitely mediated. And I would also add that for, for myself, and I think for others in the foundation world on the client side who really want to continue on the learning journey of impact investing, I love being part of conversations with our advisors so that I don't get left behind the curve either. So I'd love, I think one thing that would be great is to actually hear that a manager has invited the client to join the advisor in a site visit or in some other conversation where you're able to have more of that direct engagement.
So Myrna, yes.
Yeah, Tom, although most of today it's part of ESG is part of it's an integrated part of how we build portfolios and work with managers and so forth. But and now my focus more is on the impact side for all the reasons I've explained. But I think that for us it was fundamental. We understood and we understand that our job is to guide a conversation with a board or with many boards. Fortunately, there are many boards that we do this with. And to be able to rely on the investment managers as resources, as partners in that education process is fundamental, so that the client understands that there are many human resources around this portfolio and around this board. And that we have all bought in to the commitment of this organization to do whatever it is they want to do. And that we can do that for them in ways that will help to avoid dissonance, to avoid embarrassment in the way they manage their money vis-a-vis what their mission is. When we talk to clients about ESG, they might not get it, but when we talk about avoiding dissonance, it just, they get it.
Yeah.
Do you want, so if you're a civil rights organization, Latino civil rights organization, do you want to own private prisons? Let's talk about that. Does it matter to you? Guns, it just opens up the horizon. It's an issue of ethics and moral. And you mean I can do that and not sacrifice a return? Well, yes, we can do that and not sacrifice a return. Now, it's at that point, we're not going to pick the securities and the companies. We're relying on institutions like Trillium to help us do that. And so it invites a conversation to bring more people to the table and talk about that particular issue. And likewise, it goes on about organizations representing women. That, the whole issue of not enough women in the room. So I get to be, I get to be the one in the room, and I get to, invite that conversation. So we rely on the asset managers as our partners in understanding that our work is educational work. The money's not going to get invested if we don't have informed investors. If our trustees don't feel comfortable that they can make an informed decision, because we tell them, we teach them, you're a fiduciary. What does it mean to be a fiduciary? You're managing somebody else's money. You're making choices on behalf of other people, an institution. So that you as a trustee feel that you are making those informed decisions, and it empowers us and it empowers those trustees when we can rely on these asset managers who have a story to tell that's supportive not only of getting rates of return, but also of helping these trustees to realize that they can, in fact, avoid dissonance. And that's huge. So it's not just Myrna, it's a team of advisors. Our job is to do the due diligence and bring that team of advisors alive. And we'll do all the mathematics to do the optimization, risk return, and all that jazz. That's what we're supposed to, that's what people expect us to do. But this other piece, that's the qualitative aspect of that relationship. I can't do it alone. I need you. And I call the managers, and we do conference calls, and we do annual conferences, simply to bring all of the stakeholders into the room, all of our organizations, the asset managers we work with, and bring sexy topics. You can do the risk return and what happened in the capital markets last year in the first 10 minutes. What are you going to do the rest of the day? And these are the topics that are important, and that's where the asset managers are absolutely vital. for someone
Yeah.
sitting where I'm sitting.
Hey, Steve, I have a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay,
Well, if you don't
jump in.
mind,
Wait, let Mike jump in here.
Okay.
I'll try and be brief.
We'll jump to some questions.
I just want to say,
please go, Mike.
We're in the business of ESG and impact investing. We're still in the storytelling business because we don't have the metrics for all the different asset classes, and we'll probably won't cover that today. But Tom's company Trillium does an excellent job with their advocacy highlights of really doing that storytelling, why these things are important and why they're invested in the places that we are. Money is still a really sensitive issue, even for those of us like myself and Myrna who've been in the business for decades. We're still trying to ask the right questions. I literally carry around these things I call discovery cards. So when I sit down with clients who may not be as open as I'd like them to be, I ask them, is education important to them? Passing on, money through philanthropy, next stage in life if they're close to retirement. Those things are equally as important to what they want to do. I have to do those same sort of things on the impact side. So we got to figure out whether climate change is the most important issue to them. And really, for us to be able to execute, we have to be able to understand the why.
Great. And so on the questions, and Mike mentioning those discovery cards, there was actually just a question about, are there tools intended to help identify an investor's investing goals profile? Are there like personality type tests that you use to actually help clients figure out their impact profiles? It sounds like the discover is like that kind. How do you work with? And I guess there's also like a different way of working with an investment committee or a board versus a high net worth individual or family in terms of kind of surfacing some of these. Yeah. But there are maybe a few, Myrna or.
I can jump in since I'm already off
mute.
Yeah. I will say, it's a much different construct when you're talking about endowments versus families. So I'll take the family first. You've really got to dig deep and ask the right questions. I think when in the prep session, I shared the story about I had a client for 5 years, and because I had not asked the right question in the right way at the right time, I was unaware that gender lens investing was important to them. We were building a 100% impact portfolio, and I just didn't know. So asking those questions continually and repeatedly, making their IPS a living document, whether they're an endowment or a family, make sure you're readdressing that. It's a little bit easier on the endowment and foundation side because you do have that guiding document, hopefully as an IPS, where they've really defined where they want to see and enact change. For families, it's a little bit more difficult, especially with larger families. So you've got to ask the right questions, maybe, ask the right questions for different sections of the family at different times. There's all sorts of tactics and ways to get to it. I don't think there's any one test that you can take and just say, here, we've got the right portfolio for you. We're still in a customized, bespoke type of business, which is great in some ways, but it also makes it tough to scale. But it makes our role all that much more important.
Great. Myrna.
Something that we did in actually creating and evolving into a real ecosystem, one of the things that we did is that we actually mapped out the continuum of all the ways that an entity, an institution could borrow money, for example. So if you live in Puerto Rico and you're a business person and you need to borrow money, you immediately think Banco Popular, First Bank, right? Commercial banks. And again, this is transportable to any jurisdiction in the world. You're going to think about your commercial bank first. Then down a notch are the credit unions. There's 140 credit unions in Puerto Rico. Then there's the private credit space, which was zero back in 2014. There was nothing there. Then you've got the CDFIs. Then we have the community loan funds. And then you've got the microloans. And so we literally drew out this continuum. And so when we have and then we did the same thing for equity, by the way. So when we sit with trustees as part of the education process and we say, okay, these are the ways that and most of them, many of our trustees are business people or they work at banks, so they get it. These are the ways in which you can actually make an investment, you can make a financial return. And guess where that interest is coming from? It's coming from here. We're saving jobs, we're creating jobs, we're contributing to the treasury to pay our debt, which is a huge topic here. These are ways that we can, with part of our money, allocate resources to contribute to the development of the place in which we live and the place from which our money is coming from. We are all in this ecosystem together. So from the private, of course, those are private, private kinds of investments, but that has helped us to help clients to visualize what's possible and to understand the math. You can talk to the math until you're blue in the face, but when you talk about community housing, creating housing, microloans for agriculture, taking the agricultural step of value-added products and investing in the companies that are generating the value-added products. It's a very sexy conversation, and that you have the opportunity to participate in that. And it's not charity, you're actually going to make a return, which is competitive. Then we begin to get some attention. So it really is about educating, and the opportunity for us has been, how do we visualize it? How do we visualize the narrative? Some of this, a lot of this is theater. It's, what's your script and what props are you going to use to guide that conversation to help the other side have their aha moment, which is a question I want to ask Stacey. Boards have an aha moment, some earlier than others, where they see it and they get it and they visualize it. And we can really do that? And so, that aha moment, part of my vocation has been to get my boards to that moment. It's oftentimes very, very frustrating, but when it happens, it's hugely rewarding. And then the money begins to flow, and the entire ecosystem has benefited from that. So the tools around educating and helping people to visualize where that money can go, what it can do in the community, and how it comes back to them in the form of a return, but it also comes back to them in a visible, measurable improvement in the quality of life of the people in that community is huge.
No, and I think that's that was actually one of the questions. Actually, Bruce Kahn was asking about how can kind of short-term bridge loans be used for impact. And I think, Myrna, you're kind of answering it. I think we also are seeing there are a lot of institutions who may not see themselves set up to do impact investing because they don't have an endowment per se, but they may have an operating reserve. And there are all kinds of interesting ways you can work.
That's right.
And reimagine what your money can do, even if it's not going to be deployed.
Exactly. So rather than putting it in the money market fund of XYZ firm, deposit it in the credit union.
Yeah.
Or
So
the community loan fund.
Good. Stacey, do you want to talk about your aha moment? Or
well, I would say that for Woodcock, I was pretty lucky. I think most of our board had that first aha moment of, the concept of wanting to align assets with your mission a very long time ago. But the other piece of education that comes along with it is really figuring out how you execute that and understanding what different types of expertise have to be available to you and what resources you need to be really strategic about your impact investing. So we have been, like I said, the foundation really started doing impact investing in the early 2000s before I was there, but it was in a more ad hoc manner. And it was I think for us, it was the next aha moment of, we really need, there are other foundations that are bigger that have been able to learn with their advisors and move them along. But for us, we really needed an impact advisor similar to, the type of advisors that you all are, to be in the journey with us to get us to the next level. And now the majority of our funds are impact aligned. And it's, the two questions for us of how do we keep moving so that all of it is impact aligned? And then how do we go deeper so that we're moving along that continuum from ESG fund to direct investments by impact theme, and, being clearer on how to measure, what we can measure, just going deeper along that entire continuum. So for me, I was very lucky that my board was already in a really great place before I joined the foundation, but it's just, I think there's constant education that follows.
We're getting very close to the top of the hour. And before, I just want to put out, obviously we're having this conversation at a time when there is a there's all kinds of very pressing topics facing the world. There's no shortage of those, being racial equity, COVID, climate catastrophe. What I want to just put out to the panel of what are you seeing how your organizations are dealing, either through your clients or through products? Like what is the relevance to what you're seeing happening out, happening out there right now? And this is like for short answers, sorry. But like what are you seeing out there, and how are you seeing this affect how you're working and how you're working with your clients? Anyone want to jump in?
Well, we work with a community foundation and the largest private foundation, grant-making foundation. And the conversation is around women. It's around ethnicity. Puerto Rico has an extraordinary Afro-descendant community. It's a huge part of our culture and our history, and everything that's happened in the US applies to Puerto Rico. And so where are those communities, and where are we going to help in education, and where are we going to help in creating jobs, is a big debate around the table. And we come back to the same place. Every one of those communities has a credit union. There's a community loan fund in Puerto Rico that can direct monies in that direction. And to the degree that we are creating our voice, what's very interesting is that we're getting visited from institutions in the United States, which for a long time have been looking at Puerto Rico and saying, my goodness, we should have done a really much better job in getting you out of the hurricane situation. But it's focused in, it all applies. And so it goes back to the same thing. How are we going to put the money in the hood? How are we going to create the jobs? How are we going to keep it there and get those people good qualities of life? It's full circle.
Great.
I would add that there's a role impact investors can play in looking for intersectionality right now. Myrna is looking at place-based investing. And if you look at those issues you just mentioned, Steve, COVID, racial equity, climate, they're not operating independently from one another. And, if you place a lens on your investing activity instead of just trying to come up with a separate box that you want to check, it can, I think, lead to greater and more enduring impact. And so, an example in racial equity, if that's something that really matters to you, don't just look for a fund that's managed by a person of color, but add questions about where people of color are in the management and decision-making processes when you're doing your diligence on investments. And, you can look at all of that. You can look at climate and COVID-related impacts even within a place-based strategy. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can really have these intersectional lenses on any given investment through your due diligence and the questions you're asking.
Great.
Yeah, I would say for me and my organization, we've done it a couple different ways. We try to be the change that we want to see. So internally, we've doubled up on our grants for racial justice initiatives. We've created a space for people to talk internally to the entire company. I was part of one of those, I was a panelist on one of those conversations that are ongoing. They weren't just one point in time, which I really appreciated. We're going to continue to do this and continue to try and get better at this. And then, we publish reports to your point, Stacey, and I think Myrna, you made the same point. We're very clear about where we're doing well, which is on gender. We've done really well on promoting, hiring in terms of gender. We're still continuing our journey on racial equity as it pertains to investing. And for myself in my own practice, I've been incredibly supportive of women and minority investors that are largely underserved for a number of different reasons, but it's really important to me. My mother was an entrepreneur. As you can see, I'm a Black male in America. So these things are important to me, so I make that a part of my practice.
Great.
Awesome. Then just very quickly, since mindful of time, at Trillium, the approach is very similar. We're very much looking introspectively, internally, at what we can do better as a firm in terms of our culture. We've launched a new initiative internally, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, that's really seeking to further promote a culture of inclusion and diversity at Trillium itself. And, following on the idea of improving sort of the internal policies and practices, also how we're applying these concepts as they're evolving to our investment processes and shareholder advocacy work. I think we are constantly honing and evolving our investment approach. I think as a result of sort of the racial justice protests and the coronavirus pandemic situation, there's been an increased emphasis placed on the S of ESG in a way that I don't think had historically been as prominent, such that we're really refocusing our efforts on better understanding human capital and social capital and the drivers for determining ESG leadership in those areas. And then through our advocacy work, looking to identify best practices and pressure the companies that we hold to adopt those best practices to continue to drive that evolution and growth, not just in our investment companies, but in the broader capital market context.
So I think we'd love to continue the conversation, but we're at the top of the hour. So I really want to thank everyone. I want to, first of all, thank ESGX for hosting us and thank all of the panelists. I think it's really great to be able to see the interaction, hear where people, and to hear, how they're working. And here, I guess one of the key elements that I've heard is really, this is an iterative process. It requires huge amounts of communication. This isn't about just flipping a switch. It needs to have continuity, and as new topics emerge, you've got to have the capacity to embrace those and to learn from those. So I think another big topic here is education. With that, we will hand it back over to Paul or Nigel, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Fantastic, Steve. Thank you very much. And it's a real privilege and an inspiration to have such a great group of people, not just talking about this, but being able to tell through the stories and their experience what they've actually been doing. So thank you all very, very much. I found it really quite uplifting and very much what we need in the current environment. I was just going to pick out a few things that was said on the way through that really struck me. One was from Myrna, that it's about helping people to imagine what is possible and this applies, as Myrna said, on so many different levels. And I think that is, something I'm sure we've all seen in lots of different ways in the work we've done and remains true. Another from Mike, again, incredibly important. We're still trying to ask the right questions. And I think we're going to go on that journey of trying to find better questions to ask for some time, but a really good thing for us all to keep in mind as we find ways to act on this. A reminder to everyone that there are organizations out there like Stacey's. She wants to be part of the conversations in the due diligence with the advisors, etc., and that's incredibly helpful and valuable. And Tom, maybe I should have put this up front, and I entirely share this commentary about all the different frameworks there are for trying to grapple with this. It's like linguistic anarchy, and I've got a lot of sympathy with that. So maybe as a summary and a bit of good news, clearly imagination is required in all of this. There are lots of people out there, as I think someone said right up front, this is not a new endeavor. There are various versions of acting in this way which have been around. Steve talked a little bit about systems change and systems thinking, and of course it's almost the 50-year anniversary of the book Limits to Growth from the team at MIT back in 1971. We've begun to act on some of that eventually, but it's taken a really, really long time. And just before I hand back to Paul to give us a quick heads up on what's coming up next week, a quick reminder to anyone who's watching on YouTube to share or like this and post it with your friends. If you're not on YouTube, go to YouTube and like it. This helps spread the message. Each time you click that button, 15 more people magically watch the video. Fantastic. So thank you all very much. And Paul, I'll hand back over to you to give us just a quick update on what's coming up next week.
Thanks very much, Nigel. Appreciate all your leadership, and thanks to Nick Gower, our producer, for making everything run smoothly, especially during hurricane season and power outages on the East Coast. Thanks very much, Steve, for moderating our deeply insightful discussion today, and to Stacey Faella of Woodcock Foundation, Myrna Rivera of Consultiva, Mike Lear of the Capital Group, and Tom Simonovich of Trillium, which operates the Portfolio 21 and other strategies. So coming up next week on Our next episode of ESGX is Prosperity for Diversity. And that is going to focus on it's 100 years since the 19th Amendment was ratified and giving women the right to vote. The push for the right to vote in the US started obviously before that 100-year anniversary. And so we have a diverse panel of strong women, innovators, leaders, and change makers. And so we're delighted. So please sign up on ESGX if you'd like to be in the live audience. And as Nigel said, we have the YouTube, and all of these are recorded, so you can share them afterwards. Come back to esgx.org. The following week at the end of August, last Tuesday of every August, is the Green Jobs Report. That's done in conjunction with the University of Missouri, Kansas City and Denison University, as well as the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. We overlay sustainability ratings on the actual jobs report, the federal jobs report, and we'll do a deeper dive into healthcare as well as green jobs policy. And then in September upcoming, Nick Gower is going to lead this one on green banks, setting up green banks like a federal bank or a state bank focused on infrastructure. So thanks again for joining us. Please share this as you like with your friends, colleagues, and community. We thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time on ESGX.